Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to my second channel. So today we're going to be looking at the Steam Engine Simulator Power Generation DLC. Now I know a lot of you have been waiting patiently for its release, and I appreciate your patience. You're not going to have to wait too much longer. I just thought I would make this video to give you guys an update about where we're at and how much work still needs to be done. Alright, so I'm here in Visual Studio, and I'm going to start the game. So as you can see, it starts up in the DLC because that is the game mode that I was playing the last time I closed the program. It actually does remember what state it was in the last time that you closed it, and it will just start in that state again. Now before I give a short tour of what's going on in this DLC, I want you to keep in mind that a lot of these assets are temporary. I haven't really been focusing too much on the visual side of things up to this point, so a lot of these are just kind of like in development assets. So just keep that in mind. But anyway, let's start over here at the Steam Engine. The Steam Engine is pretty much identical to the Steam Engine in the base game. I haven't really made any changes here. It performs the same, it sounds the same. There aren't really any major differences there. There is, of course, this pulley wheel that connects to this belt, and then that connects to our transmission over here. Now, the transmission is necessary because the Steam Engine is actually simulated. I know a lot of people think this is just a animation on the screen. It has a torque curve and non-linear performance characteristics, and therefore it is necessary to have a transmission so you can keep the engine running at its ideal operating RPM. And that ideal operating RPM can depend on a lot of different factors. I spent quite a lot of time working on this asset. I wanted it to be as intuitive and satisfying to use as possible, so it works pretty simply. If I click on it, you can see that I can drag the ball around, and you can actually feel the resistance when you go to engage with a new gear. Adding on to that, if you try to switch into a gear where there is a significant mismatch in the input and output speeds, it'll actually feel more difficult to shift into that gear. It kind of emulates like a real-life synchronizer in a real transmission, or at least that's the concept behind it. Connected to this transmission, we obviously have the electricity generator itself. This is meant to be an AC generator. It's not meant to be the most sophisticated simulation ever, but it does accurately model roughly the amount of resistance that you would feel, and it's a physically accurate amount of resistance to the amount of power that you are generating. Up here, we have the generator speed gauge. This is obviously one of those temporary assets that I was referring to before. It's just a copy and paste of my engine speed RPM gauge. It is going to have its own asset. I'm going to design that a little bit later, and it's going to have some special markings on it. Right now, it has this range up here at 1800 RPM. This is not actually correct. It should be around here at 600 RPM, and that is the speed at which you want to be operating the generator in order to produce 60 hertz electricity, which is kind of what we were going for in this particular simulation. Also, I forgot to mention before, but the generator actually does make a soft humming noise. I'm not showing it too much in this video because it's not completely finalized yet. The actual code that generates the noise is finalized, but the exact parameters, I'm not 100% sure on that yet. The sound also helps the player to keep the generator operating at the correct RPM. So if you start drifting away from 600 RPM, you'll find that the sound just doesn't sound right anymore, and then you can use that to correct it. So in addition to the gauge, you also have the auditory feedback, which makes it a little bit more interactive, I guess. In this empty space in the bottom right corner is where the voltage meter, current meter, and the power output meters are going to go, and that's basically going to tell you how much electricity you're generating. And that's going to connect over here to this power line visualization. This is not really finalized right now. There are a few modifications that I want to make to it, like these endpoints here don't really match the rest of the game, but this is more like a visual thing. I haven't really done that yet. So one of the tasks that the player has in the game is to make sure that their power lines are always connected. And that's done by clicking on one of these connection points, dragging out one of these cables, and then connecting it to another connection point. And there are obviously 6 of them in total. There are some events in the game that can cause these cables to snap. One of these events is something like adverse weather conditions, like a windstorm or ice storm or something like that. Alternatively, they can snap due to player error. This is, a little bit divorced from reality, but I think that it's, I've taken a little bit of creative license with some of the simulation here. If you run the generator too fast, the idea is that it generates too much power or too much voltage. It overheats your cables, and then they eventually snap. It's obviously not 100% realistic, but it's meant to be more of an abstract game, and I thought that it was a reasonable way of showing the player, what exactly has gone wrong. It's also another way of penalizing, operating the generator outside of its intended range. If we move over to the left, we can see the city itself. So in the game, this city is called Steamtown. It starts off as a small town, and your goal is to grow it as much as you possibly can. And by grow, I mean increase its population. The mechanics of the city are pretty simple. If you have constant blackouts, or if you're not generating electricity consistently, then people will start moving out and your population will go down. Now, there are always people moving into the city, and that is determined by the demand to move to your city, and that is controlled by the price of electricity, which I'll explain in a second. So the lower your price, the more people will want to move in, and that will increase your population. In order to house those people, you do have to build homes. It's not anything too complicated. It's not like a city simulation or anything. But you can see here I have this interface. If I hover over one of these empty plots and then click, you can see that it places a new building. This expands the city's capacity for population, and it's necessary in order to grow your city and then advance to the next grid size. This entire grid actually expands once you reach a certain population, and it can actually get fairly big over time. The other mechanic with the city is that you can upgrade buildings. So for example, let's say I click on this one a few times. You can see that it's now upgraded to a slightly taller building, and this applies to all of the buildings in the game. So I'll just click on a bunch of these so you can see. This is obviously not representative of how the actual gameplay is going to be because I have developer cheats on and I have an insane amount of money. In the actual game, it's a lot more balanced than that, and you will have to slowly build up your funds over time in order to build these improvements. But I'll talk about that in a second once we start talking about the economy of the game. So this here in the bottom left corner is your control panel. This gives you some high-level information about what's going on in the game. Over in the top right corner, we have basically your bank account. This is how much money you have in your municipal treasury. And then under that, your basic financial statement. So you have your income and you have your expenses. Now, the income is calculated based on what the current price of electricity is. It's how much your residents are being billed for their electricity. So you can see right now, I have the price set to 5 cents per kilowatt hour, which is pretty cheap. The income is a little bit higher than that because I've upgraded some buildings and they pay out a little bit of a bonus. But this is usually going to be around the same amount as your electricity price. And then your expenses are entirely determined by how much fuel you use. So if I reduce this, you can see that our expenses go down. So at this point, you can probably start to understand how exactly the economy and progression of this game works. So you have an electricity price, and obviously in the real game, you're not going to have this insane amount of money. You're going to have basically just enough money to continue playing the game, so you're going to have to remain profitable as much as possible. That means adjusting your price so that it's at least above your expenses. What that means is that the player is incentivized to operate the steam engine as efficiently as possible so they can offer the lowest price for electricity, and that will result in people moving into the city, and then your population will grow, and that's the entire point of the game. Over here on the left side, we have our power delivery statistics. So here we have our current demand, how much energy the town is drawing. So it wants to draw 52 kilowatts, and you can see our forecast for the next 24 hours. This allows you to prepare for like spikes in energy consumption, basically get your steam engine ready for that situation. And in later stages of the game, there is some strategy involved in making sure that you're operating as efficiently as possible, and this graph does help with that. Under that, we have our weather report. You can ignore this warning. This is just me testing some stuff. Underneath that, we have the current temperature and the current season. So the season and the temperature do actually change the events inside of the game. It changes your city's electricity consumption patterns, and the weather also changes that as well. Like, for example, if you have a very hot day, you will see a spike in energy consumption in the city from people turning on their air conditioners or things like that. The temperature also affects the operation of the steam engine because, of course, this is a simulation, and ambient effects or heat loss to the environment is also modeled. So on colder days, you do end up losing a bit more energy from your boiler into the colder ambient air. To the right of the weather report, we have this mailbox. It's obviously not complete yet, and I don't want to reveal too much about what it does right now, but you will see very soon. You can think of this DLC as a minigame that tests your ability to run the steam engine efficiently and at a very particular RPM, and that is in the face of a constantly varying load in the form of the city. Now, it seems simple on the surface, but there were actually quite a few technical challenges to overcome while implementing this DLC. As I mentioned in my last video, the base Steam Engine Simulator game has undergone a lot of improvements in order to prepare it for this release, but also prepare it for future DLCs, and the previous code base just was not up to the task. The other technical challenge of implementing this DLC is, as I said before, the Steam Engine really is a simulation of a Steam engine. It's not an animation on the screen, and I don't fully understand the Steam Engine. Like, I don't know how fast it can really go. I don't know any of the theoretical limits of the Steam Engine, so it becomes very difficult to balance a game economy when you don't fully understand all the components in the game. It's kind of backwards from most games where you can tailor the physics and the exact simulation to meet the gameplay requirements. In this case, I had to tailor the gameplay requirements to match the simulation, which I did not want to modify. So a lot of the work that I had to put in was actually just in studying the Steam Engine. It was almost like an academic or research study of the simulated Steam Engine to understand how it works. You can see here I plotted out some power curves, some torque curves, so I can understand exactly how it works. And I took this research and applied it to this game progression so that the game remains challenging as the city gets bigger, but also possible. There is some interesting emergent gameplay that comes from this simple simulation. Like, for example, as the city gets bigger, kind of an economy of scale forms, and it's very natural. It's not something that I sort of forced in there. It's just because as you draw more electricity, you can operate the steam engine more efficiently, where it's not dominated by these frictional losses and losses to the environment and things like that. So as your city gets bigger, you can operate more efficiently, you can sell the electricity for less money, and the progression of building the city very closely lines up with, the limits of operating the steam engine, at peak efficiency. And I think it'll be really interesting for the player to figure out what are the best settings at the different points in the game, because the strategy actually does evolve over the course of the game. The beginning of the game requires completely different techniques compared to the late game as your city gets to the maximum size. Anyway, a more complete video about this project will be coming out on my main channel sometime soon. I'm not exactly sure when. If you guys have any ideas or suggestions, please let me know in the comments of this video. I have gotten a lot of requests for various things. Like, for example, a lot of people have asked, why don't I add something that allows you to modify the steam engine or make your own steam engine? Now, I can understand the appeal of those things, but it's a lot more complicated than it seems, especially to fit it within this aesthetic. A feature like that is coming to Engine Simulator, which is my main project that I'm working on, where you will be allowed to build engines, and I'm not sure about steam engines yet, but it's possible that they might be included at a later time. But for now, I just want to keep this game simple. I want to keep the mechanics simple, and I don't want to introduce any additional complexity of modifying the steam engine because, trust me, it spirals very quickly out of control in terms of the complexity. So unfortunately, I'm probably not going to be making any of those changes to this game. Anyway, please let me know your suggestions in the comments, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys next time.